any further in this debate, we have to realize that side opposition is essentially conceding to side population's entire case. Because what they're telling us is that the current legal system already provides for punishment of criminal negligence, and therefore they're agreeing with all of the principles, all of the practicality behind our case. But the one thing that they do not realize is that the current legal system does not punish parents for being criminally negligent in terms of not fulfilling their responsibility regarding their children. So in the status quo, what happens is that if our coach Jake went out and murdered our entire Team Korea, then John over there would not be punished. But what we're saying is that he should, because he should be responsible for, and have been responsible for educating Jake that murdering is bad in the first place. So what we're saying basically is that our legal system is being blind, and we thank Team USA for agreeing to the fact that this kind of thing should be happening, but it's not. Now let's go on to their arguments in the first place. First of all, they talked about how we need to rehabilitate people who commit crimes. They say that they agree to the second part of our policy. Now what we need to ask is, if they're agreeing to our second part of the policy, then why do they not agree to the first part, which not only upholds their idea of criminal negligence that they already agreed to, but second of all also provides an extra safeguard, adds extra deterrence and extra effectiveness to helping make sure that these children are completely rehabilitated, by making sure that the parents can look out for their better interests, are incentivized to become more responsible parents, and are incentivized to better educate their children to prevent such wrongdoing in the future. What we see is that we're simply being more responsible by providing you two fronts, by addressing the root of the problem in terms of both the children and the parents. We'd like to see why side opposition, if they approve of rehabilitation of children, do not approve of reformation or rehabilitation of adults. Now we'd like to go on to the point that they talked about how individuals should be responsible. Now what we think is that fundamentally flawed in Team Opposition's case is that they do not recognize that minors are not yet full-fledged individuals. What we see is that the legal system itself recognizes this. Minors can't drive, they don't have voting rights, or so on and so on. All these things are left and entrusted to their parents. Because the parents, as long as minors, are those who are responsible for these very children. They're not full-fledged individuals. We don't recognize them as full-fledged individuals in terms of society. So why do we have to make them solely take responsibility when they're not yet responsible for their own selves? That's a question that Team Opposition must answer. Second of all, they say it's, again, important for children to, in their process of development, for children to be able to be independently responsible. What we say is that this development is not yet over, and therefore they are, again, not yet responsible for themselves. In that process of development in which they are still in a moment, sir, their parents are still responsible. What have you got to say to that?
You hold them responsible for yourself through the second part of your plan, which clearly means you believe that they should be responsible to some extent, and we just both agree.
As we said clearly in our policy, we're not holding them to complete punishment like juvenile detention. What we're simply doing is re-educating them. That's not holding them fully responsible or punishing them fully for their crimes. That's in fact just educating them and rehabilitating them, which you yourselves want completely. What we say is that in addition to that rehabilitation, we're also making sure that these adults are incentivized to protect their children and then contribute to this re-education and rehabilitation of their children and prevention of future damages. Now what we also see is that they keep saying that we're deferring responsibility to these adults. What we see is that we're not deferring any sort of responsibility because this responsibility lay on the adults, the parents, from the beginning. Parents are there to educate their children, to look out for their well-being, make sure they don't land in jail, and make sure they don't go out committing crime in society. No, thank you, sir. Now finally, we talk about this whole criminal negligence concept in which we talk about this whole thing about how we are violating the autonomy of their parents. Well, they say we can't say that the parents' actions is the direct cause of these children's harms. What we say is that the criminal negligence comes from the fact that not because the parents tell their children or cause their children to go out and commit their crimes, but simply because the parents were not responsible enough, were not looking out for their children's actions, and did not fulfill their responsibility in terms of educating these children. Which leads directly into our resubstantiation of our own case. Under the team line, that it all starts at home. We've brought to you 3 clear arguments so far. First of all, regarding responsibility. As we've told you again and again, the responsibility still lies with the parents because these minors are in the process of development and process of education. The second argument, about feasibility. Not only have we already established to you about the legal feasibility, which they seem to have completely agreed with, in which you have an established legal system that will help us implement the system, we also have an added level of practicality. In terms of the fact that by being able to not punish children with juvenile detention, but rather rehabilitate them while adding their parents parents as an added safeguard in terms of punishing the parents themselves, we see that we're also able to save resources in terms of our criminal system. We see that all of these practicalities come together so that we can provide a more efficient system under our policies. And finally, the third argument that we talked about was about child reformation, which basically addresses the root of this motion, the root of the problem, in which that we actually want to prevent these crimes. We want our children to have a second chance, to go in a better direction, and that's what we're providing for today. And finally, we'd like to go on into our fourth argument about adult reformation. We're going to examine this on two levels. First of all, the incentive to become better parents, and second of all, the incentive to become better people. Now, first of all, on the first level, the incentive to become better parents. What we see is that if we punish parents for their children's wrongdoing, what's going to happen is that these parents are going to be galvanized into action to look out for more actively for their children's well-being. What we see is that in the case of DeKalb County in Georgia, parents were punished for their children's truancy. What happened was that there was a 70% success rate of this policy, and parents became more active. Not only did the truancy rates go down, but parents also began participating more actively in school groups, in parent-teacher groups, and so on. No, thank you, sir. So what we see is that this kind of policy works. We see that these parents, they actually see that they have to take more action, and they are incentivized to become better parents, to be more active in terms of their parenting. And on a larger scale, the second level of analysis, what we see is that it also incentivizes parents to become better people themselves. We think that on a larger scale, by punishing parents for their children's crimes, because we're making these parents more responsible in terms of the children, we can also make this serve as a deterrent for adult crime itself too. Not only child crime, but added to that, adult crime. What we see is that 80% of African American criminals, they are hereditary criminals. Basically, their parents are criminals too, and so are the children. What we see is that if we start punishing the parents for these children's crimes, then we see that we can make it go together. That we can not only reform the children, but also the parents at the same time. We can have a double benefit, and what we see is that that's also going to help society as a whole in terms of deterring our crime, not only on the front of minors, but also on the front of their parents too. So all in all, what has Team Opposition been telling you today? Under the stance that we want to protect our children, we want to protect our homes, and we want to protect society as a whole. We have been telling you clearly that there is a principle, that it's feasible, and that also we need to reform both levels of children and adults too. Now, what Team Opposition now has to do when they come up in their following speeches is, first of all, they have to deal with the issue that children are, by essence, minors who are still under the responsibility of the adults. They have to deal with this issue of where the responsibility actually lies. Second of all, they have to deal with why they only want one part of our plan when, in essence, by principle, they agree to both parts. And if they do not deal with either of these issues, then we say their case automatically falls to proposition. Thank you.